Health Marketing Collective, where strong leadership meets marketing excellence. I'm your host, Sara Payne, a health marketing strategist at Umbrella Communications, and I'm bringing you fascinating conversations with some of the industry's top marketing minds. Today's episode is all about collaboration. How can we better leverage partnerships to drive meaningful change in the industry? I truly believe it's in the sharing of ideas and the sharing of resources that we can drive the change that's really needed. And I also believe that we must ask ourselves as brand and marketing leaders, how can we better leverage collaboration and what more can we do? To push on this topic with me, I've invited someone who spent their entire 20-year career advancing collaboration within healthcare. And that someone is Frank Jaskulke, VP of Innovation at Medical Alley. In his role, Frank leads startup, international, and corporate innovation efforts to ensure the Medical Alley community is the epicenter of health innovation and care. It's crazy to me that Medical Alley just celebrated its 40th anniversary of advancing innovation in this industry, and Frank has been along for the ride for the past 20 years of that journey. Welcome, Frank, and thanks for being here.
Thank you, Sarah. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's great to see you. I always enjoy our conversations. To start off with, Frank, what is Medical Alley and why does it exist? Give us just a brief explainer on Medical Alley.
Yeah, back in the 80s in Minnesota, we had a large computing industry here that evaporated. And for the listeners, if you've ever read The Innovator's Dilemma, it's literally about Minnesota's computing industry evaporating. In the wake of that, our medical device industry was supercharged. Earl Bakken went around, founder of Medtronic, hired a ton of engineers, grew faster, and he had a thought that if the computer industry could collapse, that could happen to healthcare. And so he and Governor Perpich and a few others got together, started Medical Alley to make sure that this community would remain the disruptors and not the disrupted in health innovation. And that's what we've worked on for 40 years. How do we position this industry, this community to be the best on earth?
And here we are. I mean, it is one of the best on earth.
Right.
I mean, we might be a little biased on that, Frank, but our listeners probably are too. So I think
the progress has been good. Yeah.
Absolutely. I want to go right into the topic of connections and partnerships. What's your perspective on how marketing leaders can foster productive collaborations to accelerate their market growth?
Yeah, I think one of the first things I always come to on the marketing side of the world is that mindset of abundance versus scarcity. It's sort of trite and overdone. We've all heard it, but I see far too often that brands and companies don't truly embrace it. And they're thinking about competition in a way that I would argue is outdated. There's still competition, but your competitor today could be your partner tomorrow, or maybe even an hour from now. And not enough organizations have that mindset of looking at the market more than just transactional or zero sum, but looking at how what they do contributes to the success of others and how what others do might contribute to their success. And when you come at things with that frame, I would argue you start to see opportunities in the market, ways of positioning your company, ways of developing new value that are far greater than what a company can do on its own or in more traditional manners where, for you to win, your competitor has to lose.
Yeah, no, I really love that thought, Frank, and I think you're absolutely right on that. And I want to ask you, where do you think we're lacking partnerships in the industry? What areas need more emphasis to really drive effective change?
Yeah, I think there's two big areas for healthcare. One is cross-sector. So if you think of like payers, providers, and then technology device or drug or digital, whatever it might be, most of the time those entities only interact when it's about a sale or a contract. The payer and the provider are negotiating, often angrily, over what rates are going to be. Or the device company is trying to get the hospital to buy one more product. And it is very much about the one entity trying to get their piece of the pie. And at the other end of it, you got the patient who is dealing with complex issues. You have societal problems of healthcare is expensive, and we're all challenged by that. And I think as an industry, we are not enough thinking about how the actions of one part of healthcare impact the other parts of it and vice versa, and learning from each other, gaining understanding of each other, and then using that knowledge to create new value offerings, to create new businesses, to create new ways of working together that aren't just, if I pay a higher rate as an insurance company so you as the provider do better, then I've got to raise premiums and my customers are unhappy. The second area where I'd argue there's not enough partnerships, or maybe not the right types of partnerships, has been leveraging the broader technology industry into healthcare. So too often we see technology companies, startups and established ones, who don't understand healthcare, don't understand the nuance of it, maybe have that Silicon Valley mindset of, move fast and break things. And they don't appreciate that in healthcare, if you break things, it might be someone's life.
Right.
On the other side of it, you have a naturally conservative healthcare industry, right? People are at risk. If something goes wrong, harm is significant. But we have underlying technology platforms, our IT systems that are decades old, were built for a different purpose. Like, I know companies that still are using mainframes for some of their technology platforms. So I think getting the technology industry to better understand the nuance of healthcare and the why that we have to sometimes move slow, and the healthcare industry better understanding what modern technologies, better software can do to open up their businesses, to make them more competitive and more patient-centric. I think that has been a missed opportunity of two large sectors of our economy that speak different languages and sometimes are not humble and empathetic with each other, and that results in conflict.
Yeah. Have you seen some specific examples where it's going really well, or some shining stars, if you will? Because one of the interesting things, I think, just for 1 second here, one of the interesting things I think we've seen is we have seen a lot of big tech come into healthcare, right? They see the opportunity, and the growth potential there, but not everyone's having success, right? So, Amazon's failed venture of Haven that folded with JP Morgan, and the third partner I'm totally forgetting right now.
Berkshire Hathaway.
Thank you, Berkshire Hathaway. And then we've seen a lot with retail as well, getting into the health sector, and
now Walmart is pulled back.
Of Walmart pulling back. And so I'm just curious, love the sentiment on, more cross-sector collaborations, more tech collaborations, but we've also seen some areas where it's failed. So do you have some examples where we have some more promising examples?
Indeed. And a comment on the failure first, but there definitely have been successes. I think Haven is a great example of when the tech community doesn't have empathy or understanding. Fundamentally, what they were proposing is concepts in health insurance that, our friends at the Blues or at United Health Group had done 20, 30 years ago.
Sure.
Right? Like, those platforms were already out there. When a group comes into healthcare and doesn't have that understanding of what's already been done, or why maybe it didn't work in the past, you run into problems. Where it has worked is when they've married those two pieces together, an understanding of healthcare and modern technology platforms. And two examples I'd give: one, a startup company here in Minneapolis called Doxy. It's an orthopedic surgeon who came out of Allina Health, had an idea for a digital physician preference card. Physician preference card, pretty basic thing. The docs and the nurses have on their list of the supplies they're going to need for the specific type of surgery. It's often a printout. It gets hand annotated. No one can read the handwriting. It doesn't get updated. There's a lot of inefficiencies, some risk of errors, but also a lot of wasted supply. Product comes into the OR, opened up, no longer sterile, but not used. Has a cost, doesn't add value. Doxy digitized it, put it on a mobile phone. It doesn't require something to be installed in the hospital IT system, so simple to implement, and then allows the doctor and the nurses to update the physician preference card and make it better for the current procedure, reduces waste, reduces variance in procedures, improves outcomes as a result, and really not complex technology, but applied to a real problem in healthcare by people who are in healthcare who have empathy and understanding. The other one I'd point out, a little bit newer company, scaling well, a company called Trivalence, startup company also in Minneapolis, but operating nationally. They're bringing payment methodologies and payment processing technologies that have been used in other industries to the ambulatory surgical centers and the medical device manufacturers. So today, even the largest medical device manufacturers often are sending paper invoices to their customers at ambulatory surgical centers and getting a paper check back. There's huge amounts of room for error, for a check to get lost in the mail, for data to be missed, and it's expensive to process. Trivalence digitizes that, makes it easier for the right information to go back and forth, for payments to be reconciled, to be accurate, to get paid faster and manage cash flow. The technology is not simple, but it's things that have been done in other industries. And this technology team paired up with a healthcare team and brought their combined knowledge to the problem. And that, I think, is really the secret sauce, is the combined knowledge of tech and healthcare working arm in arm. That's led to better successes.
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah, I think you're right. You're spot on with the combined knowledge. I think perhaps those failures underestimated, to your earlier point, right?
Mm-hmm.
How much legacy knowledge and foundation has already been built that really should be leveraged to then improve upon, to then iterate on and further disrupt with and through technology. I want to talk a little bit more about trends in the industry. You know, marketing leaders need to keep trends in mind if they want their brands to stay relevant in the conversation, particularly as they think about themselves as thought leaders. What are some of the trends that you see shaping the industry landscape over the next few years, Frank?
A couple of them. One, a small one, sort of a lighthearted one, but serious. Honest to God, has been LinkedIn. The observation that executives at Fortune 500s, at startups, are increasingly active on LinkedIn to share content, to communicate with employees and customers, that 5 years ago, I didn't see that type of activity, especially from the C-suite. I mean, I always think of the episode of 30 Rock where Jack Donaghy says, "I found him on LinkedIn, he might as well be dead." And that has so changed. And if I think about a B2B type audience, an industry where we're often B2B marketing, that as a channel, I think is elevated in prominence over the last couple of years. Second one, kind of related, but I'd say is digital in healthcare. I mean, digital health, not necessarily the digital marketing.
Sure.
There is this mega shift happening where product companies are realizing they need to build and deliver services in healthcare, maybe wrapped around their products or paired with their products. And if you're a device or a drug company, that is a big challenge. You're used to selling physical widgets, and now you need to bring data analytics and other services into the mix. There are different kinds of product development processes. There are different regulatory processes. There are different sales and marketing processes. And that learning seems to be really, really hard. I've seen it go very well in some of the imaging companies. You think like a GE or a Philips, where a core part of their business has been service contracts. They seem to be moving faster towards AI and digital than maybe the more traditional device companies. That'd be the second trend. And then the third trend I'm starting to see more and more is open innovation. Kind of to that original point of like having an abundance mindset. We have an industry in healthcare that is highly dependent on intellectual property and the protection of it. whether that's in device or in drug or in hospitals or in payers. More and more, we're seeing companies where they are collaborating with universities, with startups, with other large companies, with financial institutions, with accelerators and incubators to get more creative in developing new solutions, especially when you think of like digital or other areas that might be newer to those sectors, where they're going out and finding who has that knowledge that they don't have that they can pair up with.
Great. No, those are all really great points. And on the LinkedIn side of things, it's interesting you went there because I'm planning to do an episode sort of all around sort of the explosion of LinkedIn, and there's a whole healthcare community that
Yeah, right.
very rich conversation, and I actually want to go to the people that are on the LinkedIn side actually running that, because I've kind of got a question about the chicken or the egg on that. Like, what happened first? Did they start to see data indicating that these executives were starting to become more active, and so then they leaned in their offering around that? Or did they start to adapt their offering, and then that's sort of what brought executives in? So yeah, I agree. I think there's a tremendous richness there, and I think from a marketing perspective, definitely something to pay attention to if you're not already prioritizing that as a channel. Definitely something to be considering, and the executive visibility component of that. Not just LinkedIn for your brand, but LinkedIn for your executives, because to your point, they're there. Jack Donaghy was wrong.
Yeah. I mean, I will be excited to listen to that episode because it really is different today than it was a few years ago. And you can tell, I mean, this is a little in the weeds on it, but when you go and look at some of the comments or the timing of things, sometimes you can tell when it's been, it's been the professionals. It might have been some of your team who have put together a message, but there's a lot of content on there where it's pretty darn clear they are writing it themselves. They are active on it. And that's been an eye-opening thing for me, that and the opportunity it creates, like for our company, for our brand, to tell our story and connect with influencers and partners and customers.
Yeah, and I think some of that, we saw explode during COVID too, when there was just sort of a need for accurate information about what's happening in the industry. I think of Andy Slavitt and sort of what he did with his platform and his personal brand to sort of be this expert that people could really rely upon to get accurate, very timely information. I had another topic I wanted to get your thoughts on, Frank. What about preventive medicine or functional medicine? Do you think we'll get to some meaningful work there as an industry? And I know you're very active, Medical Alley is very active on the policy side as well. I'm just curious if the incentives will ever be there to motivate more organizations to focus in this area.
You said the key word there, the incentives, right? We all know prevention is the right thing. It's a good idea. All of us as individuals, as employers, as society, we have the best intentions. And then I don't know about you, but for me, it's like I eat one potato chip, I'm eating a bag of potato chips.
Yes.
And there are lots and lots of companies who have tried to build a business around wellness and prevention, and they often run into like two big challenges. One, if they go for wellness, it's so broad that the impact is diffuse. Right? The best companies are able to show a small percentage change across a population, but only a big giant population in a little percentage. And then there are ones who they try to go more specific disease or condition, and they're able to have impact, but it's very expensive, and we don't have the payment mechanisms in place to really cover that. I think that is changing. The slow march towards value-based care gets us closer, maybe not to like childhood prevention of heart failure when we're 60, but to investing more into things that are, like pre-diabetes, more near-term preventable things. And over time, I do think we'll keep marching in the direction of more prevention, more wellness being covered by insurance, being incented through technology, through our workplace. But it is fundamentally a really hard thing because it comes down to they've got to get you or I to change some behavior.
Yes.
And as good as marketers are at doing that, it's hard. It's
Yeah,
hard.
especially with whatever they're sprinkling on those potato chips.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Right.
I
Like
mean,
I think, yeah, our insurance company is not going to beat out Doritos.
right, right. Yeah, and maybe I'm an idealist, Frank, but I really do think, well, okay, pun intended on this with the potato chip reference, but I really do think there's more appetite for a
Mm-hmm.
focus on preventive medicine than there has been in the past. But the incentives just aren't
Yeah.
as robust as they need to be. And so I think that's maybe where we need to see some more work to be done. But I do think as a
Yeah.
population of people, we're becoming more educated, I think, on the impacts, right? We're starting to see research on, the different sort of lifestyle impacts of
Yep.
different choices we make. I multiple times this year, there's been more things about processed foods and the
Mm-hmm.
impact of that. So yeah, I'm
I think
hopeful.
you're 100% right about that. There, it feels like there's a slow culture change happening
Yes.
that might create the demand side to make more of the preventative and wellness type businesses work. The one I think a lot about is how alcohol consumption has
Yes.
changed in the U.S. Right,
Yes.
we've done all this work on getting healthier and food and everything, and the one that seems to have hit is drinking. But then I look at the flip side, all the work that we've done on smoking cessation for the last 40 years now that has made huge inroads in taking down smoking rates. And talk about culture change, the way we now think about marijuana and how much that, along with e-cigarettes, has led to an explosion in smoking again. And
Yeah,
I think it's a fascinating thing, and really it's a marketing thing of
it
how
is.
culture has changed its view of these different activities and then the impact that may have on public health.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think going back to sort of the responsibilities that we have as marketers and brand leaders,
Mm-hmm.
you know, putting emphasis on awareness campaigns can drive positive change
Yeah.
and positive impact that will, lead to greater adoption of, whatever therapy, intervention
Mm-hmm.
it is that your organization, is selling and makes available in the marketplace. And so I do think we see a lot of positive signs of that. But to your point, sometimes the pendulum swings in a different direction, right? Because people might believe that the e-cigarettes are somehow less dangerous, right? And
Mm-hmm.
perhaps that's a step towards cessation. And then now here comes a study that says, turns out those might be more addictive than nicotine, right? So it's the what we don't know piece of it that
Right.
that is interesting. And so I think the science over time helps sort of prove out some of that the societal shifts in behavior.
Mm-hmm.
I'm interested in your take on brand positioning in a competitive landscape. There are obviously
Yeah.
many different players vying for attention in this industry. And what's your take on how companies can really effectively differentiate their brands? And what role do you think innovation plays in helping to sort of shape that brand positioning?
Yeah. Two big thoughts. One, um, there is I feel like there is a lot of hesitancy on the part of established organizations to be innovative in their brand positioning, in their marketing. They worry about rocking the boat or if things don't work.
Mm,
And short term, that probably works. Long term, it leaves them open to competitors. And we're seeing that all over healthcare right now, where organizations that have done well in the world as it existed for a long time were not able to respond when new entrants came to the market and didn't appreciate how rapidly the market could shift. Healthcare does not move fast, but it does move. And I won't name names, but I would argue there are organizations today who are waking up to their foundation has been eaten out by competitors that are picking off different pieces of the business. and now they're not as competitive as they once were. So I think that hesitancy to take risks is starting to come back to haunt a number of them. And then second, on the innovation side, there is so much more we know about what works and doesn't work in driving behavior change and driving adoption. But there are still so many organizations that are kind of doing the same thing they've always done. And I think digital technologies, whether we're talking LinkedIn or targeted advertising, there are so many things we can do now that make it easier to try new things at low cost and take risks that aren't going to sink the ship. I think there should be more adoption of those, but then this is the tension, somehow not over-indexing on what you can measure, because you run the risk of, you end up, because you can measure it, you do it, and then you miss a great insight because it doesn't fit in the metrics.
Yes, I totally agree with both of those points. The first one being, don't play it too safe, right? Don't be so worried about pleasing everybody that then all of a sudden someone else comes in and starts, really speaking the truths that need to be stated, or whatever the realness of the problem is, and everyone starts running at that. And then this, don't be afraid to try something new. I did an entire episode around risk taking with Marcia Miller, whom I know you know very well. And that was just fantastic too. She had some good insights around that. She's someone who's not afraid to take risk, but I think I did that because I think it's, I wanted to inspire. Some people are just going to naturally be, some people, some companies, some brands are going to naturally be more inclined to take risk than others. But I think it's something we all have to look at. To your point, it's calculated risk, right? It's an organization out there needs to look at their risk tolerance and sort of challenge that a little bit and say, are we being maybe perhaps a little bit too conservative? Do we need to kind of really dial in, look at our mission, don't just do it to do it. Look at our mission, look at our purpose and what we stand for, and dial in the right level of boldness. And then therefore, it's not even really risk taking at that point if it's authentic to who you are. Right. And so part of what Marcia talked about in the episode is like repositioning risk in our minds as not really risk.
Yeah. I mean, there is risk in inaction as much as there is in action. And one of the techniques we've used over the years is we carve out like a risk budget effectively. And we say upfront, not deciding what we're going to do or what we're going to spend on, but we say upfront, we are going to carve out some chunk of our portfolio to take a risk, to try something that's not fully baked. Then we go and figure out what risk we're going to take. And in doing that, we get the organization on board with the idea of affirmatively, we are taking risk. It's already been budgeted. Now we just got to figure out what we're doing with it. Versus I often see companies where they're like, well, maybe we take this risk. And that just makes it easy for everyone to shoot arrows at it and go, here's all the reasons we shouldn't. No, first, get them on board with we're taking risk, then go and pick which risk.
I love that. Well, will you do a quick fire with me here, Frank?
Yeah, please. Let's go.
Yeah. So I've got 5 questions for you. First one is, name a couple of healthcare brands that you think do marketing really well.
I got to give credit to Mayo Clinic. Their commercials, like, talk about bold. Their tagline is, you know where to go. Like, yep. That is just owning it, that they are the number one hospital on earth. And if you're really sick, you know where to go. So I think that is like my absolute favorite. Second one, I think National Marrow Donor Program, Be the Match, has done a really good job over the years, both in very tactical marketing in as they've worked to build a more diverse registry, but then also in having the boldness a number of years ago to say there are these new therapies being developed that if they're successful could eliminate the need for National Marrow Donor Program to exist. And instead of shying away from it, they leaned into it and said, how can we make that happen faster? Because that's why we exist. It's not to exist, it's to help these patients. So those are 2, I think, doing it really well.
Great examples. Frank, what's a career highlight for you in your 20 years at Medical Alley? What stands out?
There's a bunch of things that I love, but probably the one that most stands out is about probably it was 2010. We passed legislation for an angel investor tax credit, an incentive for making investments in startup technology companies. I wrote the legislation. I led the team that lobbied for it. We built a great big coalition, got it passed. And since 2010, just in the healthcare alone, $1.5 billion has been raised by companies who have used it. There have been multiple exits. It has been a fantastic success, and it feels personally satisfying to say, like, hey, we did this thing that put $1 billion+ of capital to work.
100%. Yeah, everybody would want that in their career, and the fact that you've already had that is quite amazing, and that number is going to continue to grow.
Only get bigger, yeah,
over time. That'd be amazing. This one's kind of a trick question for you, Frank. Startup mentality or corporate strategy? What do you think is more important for growth?
Whoa. I will punt out it and say it depends on the stage of your business. That transitional period is really hard for companies. And I think the most important part is having the self-awareness to know when you need to start moving from one to the other. And then, usually from startup to corporate, but then also sometimes when you maybe need to move back to the startup mentality.
Yeah, I think you're right. I'll accept your punt on that one. How do you personally stay ahead of various market changes and trends in the industry, Frank?
I spend a lot of time just talking with people. I do a lot of meetings with different innovators, with corporate leaders, with doctors, and usually I just ask them, what's going on in your world? I love the old, who was it that said it? The guy who wrote How to Influence People and Win Friends. He had the idea of, to be interesting, you have to be interested.
Yes.
And that has served me well for 20 years.
Love that. So great. What's the best podcast episode or book on leadership that you've consumed recently?
Oh, I am a huge Seth Godin fan. And I also love that he trained as a biomedical engineer originally. So very, connected into this kind of world. And he did one, it was actually an old episode, but I hadn't heard it before. He did one on libraries and on why they existed the way they do and how they're evolving. It was not about leadership, but it was about leadership and this idea of making knowledge available is a powerful way to influence culture, to drive positive change, and to advance your business.
I'll have to check that one out. Certainly no shortage of talent with that guy, is there? Well, this has been really fun, Frank. Thanks for doing this with me today. How can listeners get in touch with you?
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Best way to find me is on LinkedIn. You can look me up. Or email is always easy. First initial, last name at medicalalley.org will get you any of our staff. Please do reach out anytime if Medical Alley can be of service.
Love that. Thank you, Frank. Well, as always, so many great insights today. If you're feeling inspired, do us a favor and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for being part of the Health Marketing Collective, where strong leadership meets marketing excellence, because the future of healthcare depends on it. We'll see you next time.